Among the Southeast Asian nations, the relationship between Singapore and Malaysia is a unique story. While there is a clear difference in the size of both countries, Malaysia being the bigger of the two, each have a common history, culture, and economic ties. Both countries share a border crossed regularly each day by ordinary Singaporeans and Malaysians. Meanwhile, there are numerous daily flights from different cities in Malaysia to Singapore above in the skies. And one of those routes, the 1-hour hop between the Malaysian capital of Kuala Lumpur and Singapore, is among the busiest not just in Southeast Asia but the world. According to aviation data company OAG, the Kuala Lumpur-Singapore route was the fourth busiest international route during the previous year. In 2024, over 5.3 million passengers were carried aboard flights between the two cities. Each passenger has their own reasons, whether to visit family, business, or for a vacation. While it has dropped in the rankings compared to being the top international route in 2023, the historic Kuala Lumpur-Singapore route is an important air link in Southeast Asia. To understand the connection between Singapore and Kuala Lumpur and Malaysia, we'll take a brief look at the history of both countries. Singapore just happens to be located on an island off the southernmost point of Peninsular Malaysia, the western big island of the nation of Malaysia. Malaysia covers a bigger area that includes part of the island of Borneo to the east. Both were once part of the British Empire occupied by Japan during World War II and continued to be British territories until Malaysia became an independent nation in 1957. Singapore would continue to be a British territory until the 1960s before it became a part of a newly formed Malaysian country, a collection of the other British territories in the area which would be known as the Federation of Malaysia. Singapore became part of the Federation of Malaysia on September 16, 1963. However, the union did not last long due to political differences. As a result, Singapore was expelled from Malaysia in August of 1965. Despite the setback, the tiny island nation of Singapore would become a major economic and political power of itself in Southeast Asia. Amid the geopolitical changes on Peninsular Malaysia, both countries have had a shared history of aviation. Both flag carriers of each country, Singapore Airlines and Malaysia Airlines, can trace their legacies and hubs to one airline, the former Malayan Airways. Launched on May 1, 1947, the Kuala Lumpur-Singapore route was the former airline's maiden route, and Malayan would continue to serve the region through the times of unity and separation as Malaysian Airways. After the expulsion of Singapore from the Federation of Malaysia, the airline was then rebranded as Malaysia-Singapore Airlines in 1966, before ceasing operations in 1972. The assets of the now separated airline, including aircraft, were split between the two newly formed airlines that we now know today as Singapore Airlines and Malaysia Airlines. While with a shared history, both of the newly formed flag carriers would take different paths. Just a small island, Singapore had no domestic routes, so Singapore Airlines focused on becoming a well-renowned global airline, while Malaysia Airlines would initially connect Peninsular Malaysia and Borneo. Malaysia Airlines' journey since the split has been more rough with its own challenges, including financial difficulties. The Malaysian airline has also experienced a damage to its reputation following the disappearance of MH370 and a tragic shoot-down of MH17. Despite the path being more challenging, Malaysia Airlines continues to serve as a prominent regional and global airline. The historical and cultural links between Singapore and Malaysia and their aviation connections has resulted in the connection between Kuala Lumpur and Singapore being among the busiest in the world. According to data from Flight Radar 24 from April 2025, the Kuala Lumpur-Singapore route was served by 7 airlines operating a total of over 260 flights per week one way between the two cities. Combined, the 7 airlines offered a capacity of around 50,000 seats weekly each way. The airlines operating flights on the route include Malaysia-based budget airline Air Asia, Lion Air Group's Batik Air Malaysia, and Malaysian flag carrier Malaysian Airlines. The Singapore-based carriers include Jetstar Asia and the 2 Singapore Airlines group carriers, Singapore Airlines and budget subsidiary Scoot. In addition, Ethiopian Airlines also operates a 4 times weekly Fifth Freedom route between the two cities. On any given day, you will have multiple choices of flight departure times between Kuala Lumpur and Singapore from the airlines based in either cities. Travelers can pick from up to 12 flights per day with AirAsia, 10 with Malaysia Airlines, 7 with Singapore Airlines, 4 each with Scoot and Batik Air Malaysia, and 3 with Jetstar Asia. Of the airlines operating flights between Singapore and Kuala Lumpur, the Malaysia-based budget airline AirAsia and national airline Malaysia Airlines offers the most weekly flights, AirAsia with 80 and Malaysia Airlines with 64. The Malaysian airline companies are followed by Singapore-based Singapore Airlines with 47, Batik Air Malaysia, Jetstar, and Scoot. AirAsia and Malaysia Airlines also offers the most weekly seat capacity, nearly 15,000 for AirAsia and over 11,136 for Malaysia Airlines. Despite operating fewer flights compared to AirAsia and Malaysia Airlines, Singapore Airlines trails the two Malaysian carriers, offering over 10,000 weekly seats. While operating fewer flights per day, Singapore Airlines deploys both narrow-body and wide-body aircraft on the route, including Boeing 737s, including the MAX 8s and the Dash 800s, and the Airbus A350. Scoot also does something similar with the use of its Airbus A320, A321s, and the Boeing 777-8 Dreamliners on the route. With the lead in weekly flights and capacity, it is no surprising AirAsia leads in the weekly available seat per mile on the Kuala Lumpur-Singapore route, with a weekly ASM of over 4.4 million. AirAsia is followed by Malaysia Airlines and Singapore Airlines. However, when the Singapore Airlines group carriers, Singapore Airlines and Scoot, are combined, they jump to the second weekly ASM of over 4.2 million. Singapore and Malaysia are neighboring countries, and there are various options along with air travel to make the trip between Singapore and Kuala Lumpur, though for many, air travel is the most convenient option. Between the island of Singapore and the southern part of Peninsula Malaysia is the Johor Strait, also known as the Straits of Johor, where each day it is estimated that around 400,000 people cross the straits between Singapore and Malaysia. Those who wish to cross between both countries can do so on two bridges, the Johor-Singapore Causeway and the Malaysia-Singapore Second Link, or board a ferry to cross the straits from Johor after a drive or train ride from Kuala Lumpur. With the land transport options, any trip between Singapore and Kuala Lumpur will require a few hours of travel time, usually around 5 to 8 hours, and a transfer to cross the bridge or a ferry ride. Despite not necessarily being the cheapest option and the time needed to get to and from the airport formalities, air travel is the fastest means of travel between the two cities. Budget brands such as AirAsia, Jetstar, Batik Air, and Scoot offer lower fare options, while premium travel options are provided by Singapore Airlines, Malaysia Airlines, and Ethiopian. In addition to the services between Kuala Lumpur International Airport and Singapore Changi's Airport, air travel options have since been expanded further with direct flights between the two cities' secondary airports that were once their main air hubs, Subang near Kuala Lumpur and Singapore's former airport Seletar. While separated as their own countries, Singapore and Malaysia share similar cultural practices, history, family, and business ties. Both countries once shared an airline that eventually split to become two of the most prominent airlines in Southeast Asia. While it is a short flight between the two cities of Singapore and Malaysia's capital city Kuala Lumpur, the Singapore-Kuala Lumpur route continues the historic aviation tradition between both countries. That's all for now. I definitely hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. This has been Flights in Asia, highlighting the news and updates from the aviation and travel scene in the Asia Pacific. Thank you for watching and have a great day.